Hey there, today I'm going to be benchmarking the Intel i5-2400S in 15 games. This CPU is a less powerful but slightly more efficient version of the i5-2400. It's on socket LGA1155 and it was released in 2011. You can see I'm pairing it with 24GB of DDR3 RAM at 1600 MHz as well as a SSD for the boot drive and the game drive, and I am pairing it with a GTX 980 Ti with the latest drivers. By the way, the GTX 980 Ti I set a 80% power limit for thermal reasons, but it still won't be the limiting factor when it comes to this benchmark. The first game I'm going to be testing is Apex Legends at 1080p on the low preset, and the game was running alright, I guess. It was stuttering quite a bit. The average frame rate came out to 58 frames per second, and the 1% low was 23. And yes, I waited for the shaders to optimize. It doesn't say it's optimizing shaders in the main menu, but I waited until the CPU usage was down to an idle and not pinned at 100%. Next up is Battlebit Remastered at 1080p on the high settings. And the game is on a 127 or is it 124? I don't remember. 100 plus people versus 100 plus people match. Either way, the game is getting 76 frames per second on average with a 1% low of 54. I was expecting a little bit higher frame rate, but at the same time there's over 200 people in the match, which is a humongous number. Of course, if you do, let's say, 20 versus 20 or 10 versus 10, you're going to have better performance. I also tried the potato preset, and that did precisely nothing to the frame rate. It was exactly the same. Granted, I did die and was in a different spot between the high settings and potato settings, but the frame rate seems to be unchanged. The next game up on the list is BeamNG Drive at 1080p. I shouldn't have to say 1080p, everything is 1080p. Either way, 1080p on the medium settings. And the game was running... That's about all I can say. So when it first launched, it took a long time for my car to load in, and I actually was able to drive it around without the car in, which is kind of weird. You can see here it was very stuttery and the car didn't exist. But after I waited a while for the game to load, then the car finally loaded in and the frame rate got a little bit better. And I did my normal drive around West Coast USA. The frame rate was alright. It came out to 52 on average and 36 for the 1% low, so absolutely playable. Just nothing wrong with the experience, it just took a while to load. By the way, if you're wondering why the microphone sounds a bit different than normal, it's because I got a new microphone. It's a lot cheaper than the Blue Snowball. This one costed $20 and the gain on it is extremely high and it seems to be maxing out extremely easily and it just doesn't sound all that good. I need to keep playing around with the settings a while, so sorry if it sounds weird. It's a work in progress. Next up is Bioshock Infinite, and I cannot compare these results with my older results. The reason why is for some reason Bioshock Infinite completely reset on this computer and I am now back at the start instead of the place I normally benchmark. And it appears to be a lot easier to run. Either way, the game is going to be completely playable on the CPU. I just know it will be. Okay, 200 frames per second here. Once you get to the mainland, probably 150. It is going to be absolutely fine. The next game I tested was Bladepoint, and that's about all I can say about it. So, when I opened the game, alright, I got to the point of nothing quite a few times and it would immediately crash. Once I managed to get to the sign where it says 24 Entertainment, so that was neat. Yeah, I don't know why it's not working. My i7-3770, the same generation, that works. My dual-core Pentium, that works. But the 4-core i5, no, it doesn't work. I don't know why. Maybe it's a GTX 980 Ti thing. I don't know. Alright, the next game is Call of Duty at 1080p minimum. And no, just don't. You're barely getting 30 FPS at 1080p minimum with FSR set to quality. FSR could be set to performance, it doesn't matter because it's CPU limited here. You could turn on frame generation, although with frame generation the game feels actually a lot worse and a lot more jittery than just without it. So just don't use frame generation. I even tried setting a FPS cap with the generation. No. it's just not good. One thing I don't understand though is the i5 2400S, it's playing this game. My Pentium G7400, it does not play this game. And that's exactly the opposite of how Bladepoint acts. On the i5 it doesn't work, on the Pentium it works fine. Why? I don't know. CSGO ran perfectly fine, so at 1080p on the low settings, the game got approximately 70 frames per second on average with a 1% low of 38. If I didn't die so many times, the average frame rate probably would be a little bit higher. The same thing can be said with the 1% lows, because when you die, the frame rate drops a little bit for a while, and then it goes back up once you respawn. And I died 37 times and got 1 kill. Not very good. Last time I played, it went and put me against robots. Today it put me against professionals. I don't know what to think about that. Either way, the game ran a lot worse than, for example, my Intel Pentium G7400. That was able to get about twice the FPS. To be fair, it is a much more modern CPU. That was released in 2023. This was released in, what? 2012, 2011. Yeah, this is pretty far behind in age, and even though this has 4 cores instead of 2 cores, they both have the same amount of threads, and the Pentium is significantly more powerful in terms of each thread. And the fun thing is, the Pentium actually uses less power. It uses around 20 watts, and this uses around 60. Next up is Cyberpunk 2077, and Cyberpunk 2077 didn't perform very good. So I was playing at 1080p on the low settings, alright. I had FSR set to quality. It was FSR 2.1 instead of FSR 3. Either way, the game wasn't really too good. Outside of the city, it was getting around 35 to 40 frames per second. And inside the city, yeah, you're looking at around 25. Often dipping below 25, occasionally going up to 30. Not very good. And no, frame generation didn't help. At this point, the frame rate is so low, frame generation actually makes things worse somehow. So it's not even worth enabling here. Next up is Destiny 2. And Destiny 2 ran alright. So I can't use the MSI Afterburner overlay. But I was at the low settings, and in whatever mode this is, you don't want to know how long it took me to actually figure out how to even enter this. I don't even know what this is, but whatever I'm playing right now, it's getting around 40 to 50, sometimes 60 to 70 frames per second. It's not the most stable frame rate, but it's definitely playable. You can see the frame rate on the very small green text on the top right of the screen, by the way. The next game up on the list is Dota 2 on 1080p on the best performance settings, or the bars all the way to the left. And the game is getting around 60 frames per second on average with a 1% low of 30, and I often did see the frame rate dropping into the 40s and 50s, and I think once I saw it hover into the 30s for a while. It's not the best in the world, but it's definitely playable, so not bad, not great, but it's definitely a solid 5 out of 10. Dying Light 2 at 1080p on the, what I would like to say, low settings was running pretty good. It was getting 78 frames per second on average with a 1% low of 42. I feel if I went over and lowered the view distance from medium down to as low as it goes, the frame rate probably would be significantly better, but I think a medium view distance is probably fine if all the other settings are set to the lowest. Either way, it's a very nice experience. Fall Guys, I don't know what's wrong with it. Alright, so it's not the computer's fault, it's something else. I don't know. It says it's missing files, it tries to update, and then it immediately fails, or it waits a while and then fails. I'm not exactly sure why. I think I need to reinstall the entire game, and my internet, it's not the fastest in the world, and I already waited several days for updates to complete so I can actually record all these games for you, so I'm not going to go and reinstall Fall Guys. That's going to take probably another couple hours. And sadly, Halo Infinite is doing the same thing. I thought, oh, Maybe it's because of the graphics card, maybe it doesn't like the 80% power limit, so I reset it back to 100%. That didn't help. I reinstalled graphics drivers and tried this again. That didn't help. Maybe it's just it doesn't like the GTX 980 Ti architecture. I don't know. I'm stuck on this one as well. Oh well. Sorry, I'm not testing it because I can't open the game, sadly. Alright, let's move on to the next game. PUBG. Okay, this one is a mess. So, yes, the average frame rate when outside of a vehicle was alright. The average frame rate was around 48, roughly. Yeah, but the 1% low was in the single digits, if not at 1. Sometimes 0, I wouldn't be surprised actually if the 1% low at times would be 0. And if you're in a vehicle, yeah, that average frame rate of, let's say, 48, you say goodbye to that, and say hello to 20 frames per second. Yeah. Oh, and welcome the 5-second 1% lows. Or 5 second per frame 1% lows. Those kind of situations. It's just... no. After a little while, okay, fine, it kind of evened itself out a bit, but it's just not a good experience. The next game is the finals, and I'm kind of surprised how poorly it ran, but at the same time, it looks amazing compared to PUBG, so there's that. So at 1080p on the low preset with FSR set to quality, the game was getting 47 frames per second on average with a 1% low of 25. So it's not a 100% all of the time above 30 FPS, though it's quite close to that. It pretty much always is above 30 FPS, so yeah, not bad. Also, in Cinebench R23, the i5-2400S got 621 points for the single-core test and 1,989 for the multi-core test. For context, the non-S version got 643 for the single-core test and 2,443 for the multi-core test. Either way, this is the end of the video. I want to say thank you for all the support recently. That is absolutely amazing. And I'm not going to talk about that for a long time, but yeah, thank you. I didn't really expect all of that support, like, recently. I don't know what to say about that. Lots of people are watching these videos. Hi! How are you? Either way, yeah, thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great day.